Hi, my name is Martin Perhiniak. Welcome back to the digital art series here on PSD Touch Plus. Today, in the 12th episode, we are going to start working on a character design project. I tried to come up with an idea that can be interesting but at the same time easy to follow, and I came up with this idea of having a futuristic robot but using medieval weapons like sword and a shield. When I first thought about the idea, I wanted to visualize the character, so for that, as we've learned it with the spaceships, the best is to create a thumbnail sketch. This sketch can be only a silhouette or it can have some details. In this case, I also focused a bit on the details, so that's the first step, as you can see on the left. And this is what is quite easy to do. And because we've already learned this in previous episodes, I won't show this step again. I'll just show you this thumbnail sketch here. So you can see that this was the base of the whole project. So I basically came up with the idea of the character at the first step. And after that, I had to find a nice pose, a heroic pose, which will show the character in action. And that's the second step. Again, this is something that we won't discuss in details in this tutorial, because this is just a rough sketch, which again we already learned it in previous tutorials, not with this specific project, but similar sketching techniques we already talked about. So once you have a sketch like that one, a second one, the following two techniques or steps are the ones that we are going to talk about and we are going to talk about in detail. In this tutorial, we are going to do the line drawing, which is the third step, which is basically just clarifying all the details and cleaning up the rough sketch from the second step. And then in the next tutorial, I'm going to continue on this project and we will get to the finished colored illustration. Now, in this character design, I don't want to do a photorealistic design. I want to keep it illustrative. So as you can see, I kept all the hard edges of the outline, which helps to keep the illustration a bit cartoonish, less serious. In this case, that was the style that I wanted to follow. Later on in the series, we are going to learn photorealistic digital painting as well. But first of all, it's good to practice the illustration techniques. So as I said, in this tutorial, we are going to see the third step. Starting from the sketch from the second step, we are starting to create the line drawing. So let's get started. Okay, so that is the rough sketch on the right side. And I changed the opacity of the layer to 30%. And basically I'm starting to trace over the image on a separate layer on top of the rough sketch layer. So I created a new layer and the original layer is changed in opacity, so it's easier to draw over it. And as you can see, I'm using simply the brush tool with 100% opacity, and I think it was 3 or 4 pixel size with pressure sensitivity on. And I just simply start drawing over the details. The great thing with a rough sketch is that you don't have to concentrate on proportions and perspective because you already have it in the background. You can focus on the details and the little added elements that makes the whole design interesting, like these little wires and tubes and buttons and plates on the armor. So these are the elements that I'm drawing now, and it's up to you where you want to start whenever you draw something like this, but I prefer to draw from the upper body and the head and then go around it. But generally I like to keep the illustration on the same detail level, so I don't spend too much time in one area. Like I won't start doing the coloring here on the upper body till I finish the whole clarified line art on the whole character. I'm going to draw the sword now. And sometimes it's good to turn off the background, the sketch, if you want to make it make the detailed illustration different. And sometimes it's distracting to have the original sketch in the background. So that's what I'm going to do. Before I finish the sword, I'm going to turn off the background sketch. As you can see, I've turned it off now. And I'm drawing the sword. Sometimes I use the line tool with fill opacity set to 0% and using the stroke, 1 or 2 pixels black stroke. Actually, sorry, just simply the line tool with 2 pixel width and set to black color. That's what I use for the sword. When you have like completely straight lines, it's sometimes easier. And then usually I merge those layers into the line art layer that I'm working on. So this part of the illustration is getting to be on the same level, so detailed enough. And by the way, the illustration is the sketch, the original sketch is here, so you can download it from the website and you can follow me along this tutorial, so you can give it a try on your own. And as you can see, I continue drawing around the legs and the pelvic area, and I'm going to draw the details between these parts, but these are like the more armored parts of the body. So these are the parts that first I wanted to capture. Here on the right, I used the pen tool and I just drew a stroke for the shield. The advantage of the pen tool is that you can easily adjust the curve, and here I used a fill opacity set to 0% and just simply use the stroke option set to 1 or 2 pixels and using black color. And now I'm using again the brush tool to create these little details on top of the shield. And as you can see, I sometimes make it a bit different to the original design. So you don't have to follow the original design too closely. So you can always make it a bit different if you feel that's appropriate. So I'm adding some extra details on the feet, and now I'm going to draw these cables which will connect the upper body to the pelvic element on this robot. So I'm drawing these cables. They look like the guts of the robot. So yes, something like this. Maybe I add a bit more later on, but now I'm going to draw the cables between the pelvic area and the legs. I usually think of skeletons when I draw robots. So if it's a humanoid robot, then it's good to think about skeletons. And even though in this tutorial series we haven't talked about anatomy, this is quite simple to start with drawing a robot. So instead of drawing a human, it's always, I think, easier to start with a bit more abstract characters like a robot or a monster, because you don't have to be very precise with the proportions. But later on, when we are going to design characters, human characters, we will talk about anatomy as well. Anatomy is a really important thing, and it's good to know about the skeletons and muscles. You don't have to be a professional doctor to know all the muscle groups and everything about the human body, but it's useful to know about it when you draw characters. So you can see I use these elements, which makes it a bit more interesting, like the cape and the flag. So basically I want to achieve an interesting character which is combined of these two styles, the sci-fi futuristic robot with the medieval knight with the sword and the shield and the cape. So we have all the elements now. The only thing which would make it more interesting is to have somewhere on the image a human. So just to show the proportions of this robot, and you can always decide this later on whenever you want to, what is the actual size of your design, your character. As you can see, if you draw a little stick man, that is actually enough. You don't have to spend too much time on it. That will easily describe the size of your design. So I just for fun basically, and to show the proportions, I have that little guy next to our robot, and I will place that guy a bit closer to the robot. And you can be creative and create a little environment for your design, character design. So you can even place other soldiers around it, or even on top of the robot, or you can create something like Gulliver's Travel to have the robot fighting with these little guys. It's completely up to you what you want to achieve. But I think that's enough for me as the line art on the robot. And we also have that little soldier for the proportions. Now the only thing left, which I think would be useful, is to have the shadow under the feet of the robot. So I'm going to use again the brush tool on a separate layer. So I just add a couple of more details, and as you can see, I'm working on the arm on the left. But after that, I'm going to create a new layer below the line art layer, and I'm going to draw the shadow below this. It's important that I'm working on a transparent layer. So when you start drawing, make sure that you create a new layer and it's not filled with white. So I have the white on the background layer, but my line art is on a separate layer on top of it. The layer structure is really simple. You just have your white background layer, and on top of that you have probably a rough sketch, which is invisible now because I turned it off. And on top of the rough sketch you have the line art, which you can see here. So basically 3 layers on top of each other. Okay, so I'm quite happy with the line art. It's not that complicated, it's quite simple. I intentionally wanted to make it simple. Here I'm experimenting with a couple of elements for the head or helmet, but I then decide not to use anything else. So I don't want to go too far. I think it's enough. I want to keep it simple, and yeah, as I said, I intentionally wanted to make this design simple and easy to follow. And if you practice on similar designs, it can become a routine to create something like this, a character like this. So there we have the shadow. Again, probably it's better to do it on a separate layer, and then you can erase on the feet, make it look like it's under the robot. So that's all. And again, let's switch back to the original image where we can see the whole workflow that we have to go through. So we finished the third step in this tutorial, and we are going to work from this point continue working from this point in the next tutorial, where we are going to do the coloring. Till then, if you want to, you can finish this section by downloading the rough sketch and then just draw over it. Next time, you can use your own file to finish this artwork with the coloring part. Or if you want, you can go ahead and do the coloring on your own. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as well, and I hope you learned some new techniques. And as we get further and further in this series, you will see we don't necessarily need to learn lots of new techniques, because we are building everything on top of what we already know. These tutorials are more like inspirations and helping you to think of how to plan a project and how to go step by step. Because there's something in digital art which is really common. If someone tries to create digital paintings, most of the time, if you are a beginner, you will find it difficult to get through specific steps. So when you only see your rough sketch, sometimes it's really intimidating when you look at other artists' work and you try to compare your work to them. You always feel like, oh my god, how far away I am from that detailed digital painting. But if you plan ahead and you see already in your head the steps that you need to go through, try not to stop and try to be consistent following your steps, and you will see at the end you will appreciate all your work that you put into each of the steps. Obviously, whenever you start a new design, you will always be more better, and it will be always easier to go through the steps. So this is a good routine that I usually use for character design. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I will see you next time when we do the coloring for this robot. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.